Hello, Isaac.
Hello, Rabbi. Good morning.
Wow, I feel elevated today. I feel like I'm ready for a sermon on a mound.
Amen. Amen. I've been thinking about this all weekend, Rabbi. It feels like Jesus and the Sophist hat. At least ever since you told me that, all I can see is the Sophist hat and so much of this in the Sermon on the Mount. And so,
So tell me what you think when you say the sophist hat. What do you mean?
so I've been reading Elijah Soloveitchik, right? And he has this parallel between humility, or how there's a concept of humility in the Talmud and how that fits with this. And so, in many again, we could summarize each of these Sermon on the Mount, verses to a virtue, but the way in which it's explained, right, it comes out in a different way, and that's just a genius of being a sophist, as said. And I don't mean this in a negative way. I mean somebody who can take a concept and explain this in a way in which it makes it sink, or takes it to a much deeper level.
It's so interesting. Just to note the parallel between Pharisaism and Sophism. If you look up again, I'm not going to look it up, but you look at the word Pharisaism, it'll be like something apocryphal or a lie. And if you look at the word Sophism, it'll be a fallacious argument, especially one used to cheat or lie to people. So it's actually interesting. A lot of times when you have these deep thinkers who got accidentally on the wrong side of history,
Mm-hmm.
they get associated all of a sudden with evil. And I guess like even magi or magicians, you can kind of say a similar concept. The other automatically gets associated with deception, mendacity. So I think sophism, which, when we say Jesus the sophist hat, obviously, you mean it in a positive sense.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. No, I mean this in a complete positive sense. Now, I don't mean this in any negative way as well. So were you saying that it could also mean something negative?
Well, yeah, I think that's what it means. Like, historically, it's a person who reasons with smart, but fallacious, mendacious.
Oh, well, okay, but I'm sorry, I'll take my words back. No, I didn't mean it this way. I meant that he was brilliant, he was intelligent, he was wise in just his own creative way. He's Rabbi Sachs to Rabbi Sachs, put it that way. Rabbi Sachs to me is the guy of the guy who embodies creativity. And I spend my weekends reading his books, and he is just it's hard to explain. He's that creative.
Like the way that Sophos means a wise man, in like a more etymological root. Okay, very, very interesting point. So how is Jesus acting? We'll read the verse in 1 second, but how do you believe Jesus in the Beatitudes or in the Sermon on the Mount is acting as a sophist?
So that's a good point. So so much of what he said in the Sermon on the Mount, it's not new. It's things we've known. It's part of values, character. It's in the Old Testament. But the way in which it was said and how it was said, and he was able to place his finger on something deeper, it makes it come alive. And that's what I meant as in, something.
Well, I feel that's the sign of like a mystical teacher or a rabbi, I guess, or an engineer, like a person who could see the first step and see deeper. Okay, well, we're gonna have a lot to discuss today, and we'll do our best to get through as much as possible. Okay, so let's read our first beatitude.
The Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 5, verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Amazing. Okay. So to get started, why are these called the Beatitudes? They're called Beatitudes very simply because beati, the first word meant happy, rich, blessed. So I think if I would ask a Christian today, let's use a 21st century Christian, what does it mean to be blessed? Very simple. We have a word here that starts Beatitudes, blessed. What does blessed mean? So Isaac, what does blessed mean to you?
Since reading Matthew, my definition of blessing is evolving. I think that at least blessed, the way I look at this, the way I've understood this, is to see reality for what it is. That to me is the biggest blessing.
Listen to you. You sound like a sophist.
Yeah, to be able to understand reality. That's
but no, that's really cute. I feel like that's cute. But like no one would say that's what the word blessed means. You're now being like out on a limb.
Yeah, you asked me. Yeah, and you asked me what I think. You asked me what I think.
Reality, what is, and what is cursed? to see reality what it is. And what is
No,
happy? To see
no.
reality what it is.
Oh no,
And
to
what
be
is poor?
cursed.
To see reality what it is. And what is rich?
To be cursed is to see. To be cursed is to misunderstand reality. I mean, if reality is cursed and I see for what it is, that's a blessing in and of itself, because you see reality. To me,
Okay.
that to me is.
Let me give you a Jewish context for what you're saying. I think it's very true. So the word means happy. Beati means happy, rich, and blessed. So I think when we talk about the English translation for blessed, we shouldn't be so strict to use the word blessed. We have to think that it has a like amorphous or multiple definitions, and it's more conceptual. And what's really interesting, the first word in Psalms is ashrei. Ashrei ish asher lo halach b'derech Hashem. And generally we say it means praiseworthy, but ashrei also can mean happy. It could also mean blessed. And when I talk about that first psalm, I like to say it means content. And I think that's kind of what you're saying right now. A person who is content is a person who understands that I must roll with the punches. I understand that there's good things happening and bad things happen to me, but if I contextualize it within my understanding of the vicissitudes of life and the range of emotions and physical patterns that I have to go through, I understand that my reality is, you could call it blessed or cursed, because I understand my place in the reality. So I call that content. A lot of times we like to speak of the word humble. The word anav, when I was really taught the word humble, there's a famous joke, I'm the most humble guy I know. And when you speak of humble, a lot of times when we speak of humble, can the most humble person, let's imagine there's the most humble person. The most humble person should know that he or she is the most humble person. So a lot of times humble would be not the way we imagine it today, but objective. And I think there's a lot of overlap. If I'm the most objective person in the world, then I understand my place in the world. And that might look like humbleness to you. But really, I'm content in my place because I understand objectively how I fit into the world. Really, no human being could do this. No human being could really get this. But I think that's kind of what you're saying. You're saying that ashrei, praiseworthy, and or content is the person. So blessed, like historically blessed, let's be honest. You're taking blessed away from its historical context, like on side. Blessed means rich. Blessed means healthy. When Job got blessed by God, he got kids, family, health, and all these things. And when we say blessed, we've always known what blessed means. So you're saying that number one, beati maybe doesn't really mean blessed. Maybe means a bigger context. But even if it does mean blessed, blessed means something else different today. So those
I
are
think,
all
well, thank you for that. When we when we use the word blessed, and by associating that with life, health, strength, it's great. We all want to be healthy, want to be rich, want to have enough money, but life is not always that, right? There's lots of suffering in this world, and so somehow a blessing has to encompass this whole thing. I mean, Jacob, the amount of suffering he went through his life, we wouldn't want to wish this on anyone else. But we call him to be one of the most blessed people on earth, because he is one of the patriarchs. And so a definition of blessing should encompass both, or should be big enough to include both the misfortunes of life, as painful as they are, and all the things we hope for, as in life, happiness, money, wealth, all the wealth which Job had. And so
it's really interesting to say how when we start with this phrase, the ambiguity of the phrase would have been just like we're struggling with the word, so too in the first century they would have struggled with the word. This is not, I believe the ambiguity that we're experiencing is something that's inherent within the text, and that's good.
What is surprising to, or what was so surprising to me was that it starts with blessed are the poor in spirit. And this is so common. I mean, so Jesus' first sermon was, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. You can't come to that unless you have this notion of poverty in spirit. And so I see all these parallels between his sermon in 4:17 and the very first beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit. And so I look at this as in, this blessing over here, or this poverty in spirit, is what leads up, is a prerequisite to be in this place, or it's an ingredient to be in this place of repentance, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Yeah, good point. Okay, let's keep going, diving a little bit deeper before we even analyze the words a little bit farther. So this is the first beatitude, but we talked about the possibility of this being like a Moses moment. And we would be remiss if we didn't immediately look at, and I even want you to open up to this, if you could look it up real quick, okay, Deuteronomy 28, chapter 28. So while you're looking up, I'll give you the context. When the Israelites first enter the land of Canaan, Moses separates them into two mountains, Mount Grizim and Mount Eval. And on those two mountains, he puts 6 tribes on one of them, puts 6 tribes on the other. He stands in the middle. And they almost have to go through a list of blessed be you who this. And then at the end, there'll be cursed is the person who does this. I'm sorry, going backwards. It's cursed is the person who does this. And then it says blessed the person who does this. So I think anyone who doesn't see the immediate parallel here is crazy. That you literally have a man standing on a mountain speaking of blessed this, and let's be honest, Jesus also does kind of put some negative ones at the end as well. That's number one. The first historical parallel, so you got the place where it says Deuteronomy 28, it looks like, so if you go Deuteronomy 28, verse 3, blessed shall be in the city, and blessed shall be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of your womb, blah, blah. Okay, it goes on and on.
Blessed. All of these were tied to physical blessings, as in or something to physical reality, as in.
Blessed shall you be in the city. I don't know. There's nothing tied necessarily to blessed be you in the city to anything physical. Blessed to be you in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of the womb. Those are our next physicals. But I would say definitely the Pentateuch is very focused on physical blessings. Mm-hmm. But if you go to the chapter before, chapter 27, you'll see some non-physical ones, right? So if you go, just pick your favorite verse. Let's do, accused is one who causes a blind person to go astray on the road. Accused is the person who perverts a judgment of a proselyte, orphan, or widow. Accused is, et cetera, et cetera. So some of them are physical, but some of them are, don't do this, don't do that. So I think the number one thing we have to see is that we do have a moment like this, where a person makes a list of blessed be you. And I really think this is the same exact model. And what's interesting is when you look at Deuteronomy, it's when they're entering the land of Israel. And most commentators note that they got the revelation at Mount Sinai 40 years earlier, which I think this also parallels. But this is almost like a new acceptance of the laws, which I think is exactly what Jesus is trying to set up here, a new acceptance of the new kind of covenant. And I think one thing we don't speak about, you and I, is covenant. And I know that's one of Rabbi Sachs's favorite words. And it'd be difficult to note where a covenant actually took place between Jesus and the people. But there's no doubt, without us making a guesses, there's a new covenant according to Matthew. There's
so before we start, can we define covenant? And we've used this term in
a new deal. Like the way that the Jews had a deal with God, there's a new deal. They're saying, like, by the way, it worked this way, and it worked this way until we got to Mount Sinai. And then it worked this way until we got to Mount Grizim and Mount Eval. And then it worked this way until Purim. And now it worked. Now Matthew wants to say there's another stage in the history of the Israelites and the Jewish people. Now it works this way. And again, like, you might want to talk about Abraham made a covenant of God. And it's like very clear offerings. And again, I don't see that concretely happen here. But if you make the parallel to Mount Grizim and Mount Eval about the Jewish people accepting there, or if you make the parallel to the theophany, the revelation happening at Mount Sinai, both those are really good precedents that when you want a deal, you go on a mountain, you spew out the laws, and in this case, as you noted, not physical laws, it could be ideological laws, it could be whatever, you spew it out, and that kind of sets up the new deal. Because the reason you need to say these laws, that blessed are the poor in spirit, is because this wasn't said in the last deal. This wasn't said in the last covenant, and therefore I need to kind of make sure to promulgate these ideas to make sure it's said. So I think we have these really two strong parallels to Mount Grizim, Mount Eval as one, and number two in Mount Sinai to what's happening at the Mount of the Beatitudes.
So I'm surprised you said that these weren't said before. No, I look at these as it's not they weren't said before. it was said before, but it wasn't said in this way. I mean, like if you were to summarize this, blessed are the poor in spirit, it points to humility, or it points to a sense of poverty, a poverty in self, knowing who we are. Like that's been said before, but not exactly in these, terms, like in this ways, right?
What you're saying, I'd say, sure. It's very easy to say ideas are regurgitated similarly and or differently, which is what you're saying.
Yeah.
I don't think we're here to decide today if Christianity is just a breakaway of Judaism or is it a rejection of Judaism? So Yeshai Leibowitz, who I mention all the time, he says the root of Christianity is the rejection of Judaism. And I think most Christians reject that because unless you follow Marcion, you look at the New Testament as your Bible, and therefore you want to see yourself as, not you personally, but people want to see themselves as either the new Israel, United States of America as the new Israel, as the new land flowing with milk and honey, and you want to see these parallels in our current lives. So what you're saying is that these ideas of don't mess with the poor, that exists.
So here's again, I'm probably not. So here's where I'm coming from, where up until now, humility was known as something you did, as in you're humble, as in it's more defined by what a person did. But I think in this verse, Jesus makes it more a part of your identity, as in it's not so much of what you do, but who you are. And that poverty itself, to know one's place, to know the gift of life, and from that gift of life to know that there's a creator, and that and how that shapes one's view of reality. And so it feels like in this verse he's moved humility from something we did, as in, let's say I fasted or did some good works to show humility, to moving into my identity, as in, are you a humble person? And to enter the kingdom of God, you have to be humble within.
Okay, let's analyze the verse, because I feel that's what you're doing now, and we haven't started the verse. So let's turn to the verse. Okay, so blessed, we noted the ambiguity. It could mean, I just want to note the cuteness of if it means rich. Rich are the poor. I just want to note how if that, but that's just like I think a really strong. But happy, rich, blessed, whatever that means, are the poor in spirit. The first thing before we go into understanding, we have to understand what poor is, when their spirit is. The most famous thing that people note all the time is that when you look at the Sermon on the Plain in Luke, is that most people view that the word in spirit is added, because it says, blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. And that does seem to fit better with the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. So the first simple question for you, before we define poor, because we have to define poor, before we define spirit, on the assumption that in spirit is added, why do you believe it's added, Isaac?
That's a good question. Why was in spirit added? Blessed are the poor. So I don't have a good answer. Yeah, I'll have to think about it. I don't have a good answer right now.
The problem with it being added is that it waters down the argument. The other ones, imagine if it said the next line, blessed are those who mourn in theory, for they will be comforted. You would be like, that's weaker. So this actually, the word in spirit, it makes it a weaker argument. When we originally saw the word blessed.
Wait, you're saying this makes it a weaker argument?
Yeah, I'm gonna explain. Yeah, 100% it makes it a weaker argument. Watch this. Blessed are the poor, rich are the poor, special are the poor, because they are able to, they might be poor economically and or financially, but they're the richest in the world in another way. And we'll talk about how they can be richer. So putting aside, that's what it means in Luke. In Luke, blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom. It's saying that somehow wealth takes you away from the kingdom of heaven.
But Luke came after Matthew, right? Like Matthew came from Mark. Luke came after.
I mean, don't worry about the historical how it got constructed, because definitely most people do view Luke as earlier than Matthew in this line. But who cares? They're giving two different messages. That's what we care about. That Luke gives the message.
And maybe Jesus said both.
Yeah, sure. That's fine.
He only said one.
That's fine. But then there'll be two different messages at two different times. We can do both. The message of Luke is what we're going to analyze in a second, that people who are economically poor, the downtrodden, the people who are generally thrown away by society, are the ones who will have, for whatever reason, which we'll see, the greatest access to the kingdom of heaven. But then Matthew doesn't want to say that, or Jesus doesn't want to say that, or the M text doesn't want to say that. Who cares? Someone doesn't want to say it. So what he changes it to, he makes it a much, much weaker argument. Blessed are the poor in spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean, that they're blessed?
I think this makes it much more difficult, right? I mean, Paul, this to me points is like one can have all the wealth in the world, one can have access to wealth and resources, but
poor in spirit is not wealth anymore. If you're poor in spirit, it means you're lacking in spirit. It doesn't mean money anymore. It just doesn't mean that. Poor is poor. Isaac, you're poor in Hebrew language. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that you're poor financially in any way. Poor in spirit means that for whatever reason, there are certain people who you might think are lacking in their ability to connect to theology or to God, but you're wrong. Those people who you believe can't connect, they can connect even better than you. Again, it's a very powerful message, but it's a very different message. Okay, so I was going to ask, again, I don't know if you want to throw an answer, but these two, again, most people view these as opposite messages. Not opposite, like maybe not right word opposite, but like on very different parts of the strand. So if you're poor in spirit, so we already had the word spirit, and we obviously have a strong demonology in the New Testament and in Greek society at that time in general. So when we speak of the spirit, I think that means like, the way that God infuses your ability to connect to God, right?
I think so. Yes, you're preaching repentance, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Yeah, go ahead.
No, so it's really, again, like the argument of Matthew, again, like I don't want, it's just not financially based, I feel. But we will talk about finance in a second.
So I don't think Matthew is financially based. To your point, yeah, Matthew is not financially based. Matthew points, I think it points to that, as you said, the poverty of self, or an awareness of the poverty in self, an awareness of of how poor each person is, and that's not based on how much wealth they have or what education a person has. That poverty of self is much deeper. At least that's the way in which I understand this verse.
Okay. I hear. Okay, on that, I want to read you two very, very famous lines from rabbinic texts. One says, "Who is rich?" And another one says, "Who is happy?" Who is rich? He who rejoices in his lot. So what does that mean? So we'll talk in a second. And who is happy? Is that everyone? Who is wise? Who is mighty? Who is rich? Who is should be happy in this world, and you shall prosper, and who is honored. So it's just one. Who is rich? So what's really interesting, I think that this idea of rich definitely parallels our idea of blessed. We said that you might feel that there's a financial basis to being rich, but the person who's really rich is someone who actually is happy with what they have.
Yeah.
And I think this definitely sets up a parallel, again, like if you want to use the word sophist, or at least a proverb kind of attitude towards wealth. So we see very strongly in this text, in Pirkei Avos chapter 4, we have this idea that specifically you're rich if you're having a lot. And the verse that they cite is from Psalms 128:2. It's really interesting. You shall enjoy the fruit of your labors. You shall be happy and you shall prosper. So the idea is he or she who specifically enjoys the efforts that they put into the world, their labors, that is the person who will feel that they are prospering. So over here, I think we have a really interesting model of prosperity that is at least paralleling the Lukian model, that it's not specifically, prosperity is not tied to finances, but it's tied to an attitude of how do you value the work that you do. And I think that's somewhat the link that you can see now to Matthew.
That's gratitude. Yeah, that's gratitude. As in, does gratitude shape the way we view the world? It's not how much we have, but that we have something, that we even have life now, that we even have life. And anyway, I'm probably.
So I have what I think to be a fun question. When Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor," or "Blessed are the mourn," does Jesus speak only in binary terms? What does Jesus say about the middle class?
So again, but I don't read this as in, okay, in Matthew 5, I've not read Luke. In Matthew 5, I don't think 5:3 defines economical terms. This is generally speaking the poverty in self, the poverty in spirit, as in it's an awareness of life is a gift. When I read Matthew 5:3, what this shows is, does this person appreciate that everything they have is not because of them, but is a gift given to them? And from that gift, like from that awareness that that education, like you and I are able-bodied, but we didn't earn this body, and it's an awareness that though we have this body, it's not because of what we did. It's a gift given to us, and from that we can live lives of gratitude. And so that's what I mean, as that's at least that's what I
Are you
understand.
trying to argue that to live in the kingdom of heaven is just to live a life of gratitude?
Well, I think gratitude forms a basis. I would say gratitude forms a basis,
I feel
at
like
least in
very
the.
like modern Christian, but I see nothing in the text that would speak about gratitude as being the
So
part.
okay, this is why I look at this as this is why I call this the sophist hat, where he takes humility, gratitude, and gets us a way in which it's not about what you do, but about who you are. And it's very clear for theirs is kingdom of heaven, as in like living that life, having that posture is what defines a person as a member of the kingdom of heaven.
But being poor of spirit, as you just said, is an identity. It's not something you do. So again, like if anything, again, I feel like it's saying somewhat the opposite of what you're saying, that this person who you would never think would have a chance, either because he's poor or poor in spirit, to access the ideas of the kingdom of heaven. Well, let me give you one example. Let me just give you as an example. So there's a lot of rabbinic examples of people who can't access things. So one thing we didn't really speak about is this is all taking place either in the Galilee region or in the north. And a lot of times we haven't spoken so much about the attitudes of the north to the south, namely Judea to Galilee. And there's a lot of scholarly debate. Some people think the Galilee is specifically a place of lesser learning, and the Christian movement can more easily come out of a place of less learning. And some people see that it is parallel. But we actually have a lot of stories of people don't have access to ideas and how they're treated. Let me give you one. So this is from Yoma 35b. It's reported that Hill the elder, that every day he used to work and earn a little bit of money, half of which he would give to the watchman at the house of study in order to enter the house of study. The other half he would use on food for himself and the member of his household. So in other words, the access learning, the access information, he would spend half of his salary. One day he was unable to earn anything. So the watchman of the house of the study, the guard, did not let him in. You don't pay entrance fee, you don't get in. He then climbed to the roof, hung on the roof where there's a skylight, sitting over the opening of the skylight so that he could hear the words of the living God from the mounts of Shammai and Abtalion. So in other words, he couldn't pay to get in, so he listened by the roof window. It is said that it was a Sabbath Eve and it was a winter solstice and snow started falling on him. So he got covered in snow. When the dawn rose, all night he got covered in snow, and either he passed out or he slept there or he kept awake, who knows. Shammai and Abtalion, two rabbis of, this would have been roughly 20 BCE. So this is literally maybe 20 years before Jesus. Brother Talion, every day this house is bright with light, but today it's dark. Is the day cloudy? When they looked up, they saw the figure of a man in a skylight. They climbed to the roof and found Hillel, who's one of the most important rabbis in Jewish history, covered with 3 cubits of snow, which would be enough to kill you. They removed the snow from him, bathed him, anointed him, seated him in the front row of the open fire. And they said this man deserves lots of stuff. So what I find really interesting about the story that I think parallels the blessed or the poor in spirit is that a lot of times the poor in spirit is because, at least the way I see it, I feel like, I'm not sure you see it the same way, are people who don't have access to information. We also have very famously Rabban Gamliel, the famous rabbi who's mentioned in the New Testament. So, there's a lot of Rabban Gamliels, but one of them specifically would not allow people access to Judaism. He said, unless you are part of the elitist group of rabbis, unless you are able to pay the fee to get into the study hall, you don't have access to ideas. And what you see is a lack of ecumenicalism, a lack of ubiquitousness, and a lack of egalitarianism. What I see in this first line is, blessed are the poor in spirit, is that those are the people who won't access Torah. Those are the people who will never, you don't believe they could go to heaven. You don't believe they could do anything because they're always excluded by elitist class. Those are the farmers. Those are people who don't have access. And then we have this egalitarianism superimposed. The people who you believe have no chance, they're the first ones who are going to be successful in the kingdom of heaven. And again, you're saying maybe because they have more gratitude. Like, I think it's because they aren't, their minds aren't warped by money yet. Their minds aren't warped by all.
That's exactly that's exactly my point. Your mind, so because you and I are able-bodied, live in New York, and so our lives are shaped by certain things of work, career, money, this, that. But somebody who's not shaped by that, it's their view of life might be different, or how they approach it. And I think what he's pointing to is that awareness, wherein can a person step outside of themselves and see them for who they are, and not so much of what they can do or what they have. And that's how I read poverty in spirit, as in for a person to step outside of themselves and to see themselves without all the without
I
all
would
the
argue that you're kind of saying this is a call to action. Can a person step outside of himself and see the world differently? So I would argue that Jesus is not doing a call to action here. The new covenant that I'm arguing is for you to reevaluate the way that you already see the world. That these people are, you always thought that these people are number 10,000 online and you're number 1, 2, and 3. It's the exact opposite. These people are so much ahead of you getting into the kingdom of heaven. They have such a better perspective because they're not warped by your thoughts, that you're behind. You're the one who literally can never you may never be able to get out of it. These people are already there.
Yeah. So let me clarify. I didn't mean this is call to action, but as in, I was trying to explain through that through a call to action. But I think what he was laying out is this is what defines who they are. And to your point about a person knowing who can enter or cannot enter, right? And that's not based upon what they have or what they've acquired or what they know. But what he's pointing to is something deeper, as in a point of identity, as in power, as in that to have an awareness of how poor each person is, and to live out from that perspective. That's what I mean. That's how I understand the scripture, as in, does a person have an awareness of their self and of their poverty, and then and do they live, and are they able to live out that perspective? And so what I'm surprised is that this is the first beatitudes in the thing after his sermon on repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Now, I also understand repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's not so much about what they did, but more as in it's an awareness that something is coming. The awareness the kingdom of heaven is coming. And so I read the first beatitudes through that lens also, to say that it's that inward awareness of that one help himself.
Yeah, it's again, like I feel like, again, like I hear you saying, I feel like it's a little bit differently than what you're saying. The way I read it, it's that the whole way the world is evaluated is wrong. It's not about.
Amen. Yeah, that's true. The whole world is wrong. Amen. Now that's right. That's repent. Keep going. Repent.
I'm saying, like he'll literally point to a beggar in the street from Luke, or a person who has no religious knowledge, and say that person is farther along the road than you'll ever be.
Could be, that's so the truth is, nobody knows where each person is on the journey. We're all in some place on the journey. We may, so if you look at Matthew, only at Matthew alone, then it's hard to make this point. But when we start comparing this with Luke, then yes, then you can look at a beggar on the street and say that you might think this person doesn't have wealth, doesn't have access to wealth, and so they are beggar, but they probably are way along the kingdom of heaven than somebody who has wealth. And there are instances in Scripture where Jesus does make a strong case against wealth, or a strong case for those who don't have wealth, or who are on the extremes, who are on the on the receiving end of the society.
Right. Just to finish off, generally people note that there are two phrases that show up of poor in spirit. One, it says contrite spirit in Psalms 34:18, and it does show up in the Qumran community that they do have the idea of poor in spirits. So we're not going to do it now, but it would be interesting to note the differences between maybe the Psalm version versus the Dead Sea Scroll.
Yeah, so as we were talking this, I'm reminded of something I read this weekend. Rabbi Sachs has a way of explaining where when the Israelites were fighting this enemy, and Moses had to stretch out his arm, and when he stretched out his arm, they won. When his hands dropped, people were losing. And his point was, it's not that Moses' hand did all the wonders, and it's more as in, and he explains this where Moses'
Look
hand
to
was
your Father in heaven when his hands were up. Okay,
so
that's the quote. It's very famous. It's a
yeah,
mission.
so yeah, and he has a statement where Moses' hands were pointed upwards, and it's not so much about the hand, but as in that was leading them to that was a way for the people to understand that their faith or their hope should be in God, and not so much in their ability to fight a battle or to win. And so these were able-bodied warriors who were trained for battle, who know how to fight, and through that passage, Rabbi Sachs was pointing, or at least what I understood was he's saying that this was a passage where God was telling them, I want you to look at me, or to depend on me. There are places when they had to fight on their own. It's just because you look up to God doesn't mean that God's going to fight for them. And so I also look at this as in that long strand of faith, or in that long strand of thinking, that of theology, where it points to a similar thing, or an awareness of need, of dependence, of whatever we want to call it, for God, which is not contingent upon a person's wealth or health, or what they know, what they don't know.
Yeah,
and
okay.
that's
Yeah, and just in conclusion, yes, this would, again, like we did talk about from a Calvinist perspective, definitely, as you noted, from an Old Testament perspective, there's always this idea, the Tanaim, the first century rabbis, definitely were rich, they were well educated, they knew what they're doing. This definitely was meant to be our favorite word, subversive, in that generally the educated and the wealthy would have more access to God by definition, because while they might go astray with their cash, they still will be able to get a tutor. They still will be able to access a scroll. So this is actually definitely meant to be a condemnation of other first century movements and attitudes. So, because even if you're ascetic, this is past asceticism. This is saying, like, it doesn't matter if you are hedonistic or if you focus on physicality, it's that you're already lost from the start. Okay.
So isn't that the softest hat? Like, he's taken these things which I've known and kind of explain, put this in a way in which blessed are the which is both inclusive and exclusive at the same time. Like, he's able to put his hand on the finger. It's not about being ascetic or being hedonistic. It's about, do you have that awareness, or that it's not about how much you know, or if you're a rabbi, if you're not a rabbi.
For me, I view I always view Kingdom of Heaven as meant to be as most people do, the Messianic era, the first, second, third, fourth, fifth coming of Jesus, whatever coming you want, as well as, whatever the Messianic era is supposed to be. So then I try to break it down into, like, is this a apocalyptic eschatological picture versus a sapiential eschatological picture? And I think that, I always see that the people who expect change are what you cited in the beginning, a Yom Hashem, a day of God, is always a misunderstanding. Jesus doesn't physically change anything. And I think that there's only a belief in at least from my perspective, the way that all Christians in the first century saw until Paul, that there's a belief that God, he's only changing the metaphysical underpinnings. And there's never a belief that he's changing the physical world. And that's the explanation of why we still live in this world and, everything's exactly the same. And therefore, the people who expect an apocalyptic eschatological ending, the way that's described in some of these prophetic books, that never happens, are going to be very unhappy. When they read the Sermon on the Mount, they're going to be unhappy to be Christian. Because at the end of the day, you get these people who go, oh, the third coming, that's when this magic's going to happen.
Yeah, thank you. I find the first command, this one, to be, it's a very high strand, it's a very high bar. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And it is.
Well, again, the bar is not something that that you have to attain for. It's just an observation. He goes, this is how he's saying the kingdom already started. We already noted that according to him. And therefore, he's saying this is how the world works right now in him. When he's saying it, he's saying, all of you who don't see this, you're missing the way the world works.
Amen. Yeah, true.
Okay. On that note, Isaac.
On that note, Rabbi, thank you, to be continued. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.